All right, get ready, because today we're going to dive deep into something that'll really make you rethink what you know about the brain. We're talking about neuroplasticity, that amazing ability our brains have to rewire and basically reshape themselves throughout our lives. And you guys sent in some really cool research from UC San Diego, a UCTV video with a neuroscientist named Nick Spitzer. And let me tell you, it's full of surprises, especially if you're someone who likes to, hit the treadmill.
Yeah, what I find really fascinating about this whole neuroplasticity thing is that it completely flips this old idea that after a certain age, our brains just become fixed. It turns out they're constantly adapting, reorganizing based on, what we experience, what we learn, even what we do physically.
So it's not just adding new info, but maybe actually changing the structure and how our brains work. That's pretty exciting and maybe a little scary too, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where Spitzer's research gets really interesting. He looked at how even something as simple as running can trigger these big changes in the brain, especially when it comes to neurotransmitters.
Oh, okay. So before we go any further, for those of us who haven't, cracked open a neuroscience textbook in a while, remind us how neurons, those tiny messengers in our brains, how they actually talk to each other.
So think of neurons like this huge communication network. They're constantly sending signals all over the brain. Right. And they do this using these chemical messengers. We call them neurotransmitters. And for a long time, scientists thought this system was pretty simple.
Yeah, like a basic on or off switch,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. But it turns out it's way more complex than that. It's not just about turning signals on or off. It's about this really intricate interaction of over 100 different neurotransmitters, each one with its own specific job to do. So this diversity is really what allows for this amazingly precise and adaptable communication within the brain.
Over 100. Wow, that's incredible. And this is where Spitzer kind of drops a bomb, right? With this idea he calls the heresy of neurotransmitter switching.
Yeah, exactly. You see, the traditional thinking was that neurons were kind of stuck. They could only produce and release one specific type of neurotransmitter. And that was it for life. But Spitzer's research actually challenged this whole idea. He showed that sustained activity, like running, for example, could cause certain neurons to actually switch which neurotransmitter they produce.
Wait, hold on. So it's not just about making existing connections stronger. It's about potentially changing the very language those connections use. That's huge. Okay, so tell me about these running mice. How did they figure this out?
Okay, so in Spitzer's study, they gave mice access to running wheels for a whole week, which is basically a marathon for these little guys. What they found was that this constant running actually caused changes in a specific area of the brain. It's called the pedunculopontine nucleus, or PPN for short. And get this, around 600 neurons in the PPN switched from producing acetylcholine to GABA.
Okay, so break that down for me. What do those neurotransmitters do, and why is that switch such a big deal?
All right, so acetylcholine is generally thought of as an excitatory neurotransmitter, meaning it basically ramps up neural activity. It's like stepping on the gas pedal. GABA, on the other hand, is inhibitory, more like hitting the brakes. It calms things down.
So seeing these neurons go from an excitatory to an inhibitory neurotransmitter after all that exercise, that's a little unexpected, isn't it? You'd think they'd need more gas, not less. What's the logic behind that?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Spitzer and his team think that this shift in neurotransmitters is actually connected to better motor coordination and control. The mice that ran, they actually got better at other movement-based tasks after their marathon training, which suggests there's a link between that neurotransmitter change and, enhanced physical skills.
So the running itself could be triggering this rewiring of the brain that leads to better coordination. But here's what I'm wondering. This PPN, this brain region where the switching happened, what's its role in motor control? And how does switching to GABA actually make things better?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The PPN is like a really important relay center for motor commands, kind of like a train station, direct signals from all these different brain areas that are involved in planning and executing movements.
Okay, so it's like the central hub for anything movement related. Got it. But how does switching to GABA, which is inhibitory, how does that actually lead to better coordination? Wouldn't that make the mice slower and more sluggish, not more agile?
It's not really about slowing things down. It's more about fine-tuning the signals, If there's too much excitation in the PPN, it could lead to movements that are, jerky and uncoordinated. By switching to GABA, those neurons might actually be helping to kind of smooth out the flow of those motor signals. So you end up with smoother, more controlled movements.
So it's like adding a filter to get rid of the noise and create a clearer signal. That makes sense. This whole idea of neurotransmitter switching, it really makes you wonder about how our actions and experiences can shape our brains.
Absolutely. And it's not just about physical skills either. Researchers are looking into how neuroplasticity affects all kinds of cognitive functions. Things like learning and memory attention, even emotional regulation.
Wow, so learning a new language or playing an instrument or even just practicing mindfulness meditation, all that could be rewiring our brains in ways we don't even realize.
Exactly. And what's even more amazing is that it's not just the neuron that's sending the signal that changes. The neuron that's receiving the signal, it adapts too. It fine-tunes its receptors to understand this new language that's being spoken so that communication stays effective, even though the neurotransmitters have switched.
So it's like if I suddenly started speaking to you in a completely different language, your brain would actually start rewiring itself to understand me. It's a two-way street, this constant dance of adaptation happening at like a microscopic level. It's incredible. But with all this talk about the amazing potential of neuroplasticity, I can't help but wonder, are there any downsides? Could this ability to rewire the brain also lead to negative consequences? You mentioned earlier that it's not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah, you're right. That's an important thing to think about. While neuroplasticity definitely has this huge potential for like growth and learning, that same ability to change can sometimes be a bad thing, especially when it comes to diseases.
So the same mechanism that lets us learn new skills or adapt to new environments, it could also be involved in how certain diseases develop. That's a little unsettling. Can you give me an example of how that might work?
Well, let's take chronic stress, for example. When we experience stress for a long time, it's like this constant stimulus on the brain. Kind of like those running mice we were talking about, but with potentially different outcomes. This chronic stress can actually change the brain's chemistry and how it functions. And some researchers think that this could be part of why people develop conditions like anxiety and depression.
So the brain, trying to adapt to all this stress, might actually rewire itself in ways that end up being harmful. It's like an adaptation that backfires.
That's one way to think about it. And it's not just stress. Neuroplasticity is also thought to play a role in addiction. When someone gets addicted to a substance, it triggers these big changes in the brain's reward pathways. It basically hijacks that neuroplasticity process, making you crave that substance. And that makes it really, really hard to break free.
So it's like the substance is rewiring the brain to need it, even if it's hurting you. That's a scary thought. But knowing all this, is there anything we can do to protect ourselves from these potential downsides? Or are we just stuck hoping for the best?
No, not at all. One of the most exciting areas of research right now is figuring out how we can actually use neuroplasticity to our advantage, not just to create positive changes, but also to minimize the risks.
So we can be more proactive about shaping our own brains, making sure that neuroplasticity is working for us, not against us?
Exactly. Like, for instance, mindfulness meditation has been shown to have these really positive effects on brain structure and function. It could potentially even help protect against the negative effects of stress.
So learning to calm our minds and manage stress, that could actually be a kind of brain training, helping to steer our neuroplasticity in a healthier direction.
Precisely. And it's not just meditation. Regular exercise, eating a healthy diet, getting enough sleep, all of these things are super important for supporting good brain health, and they help promote beneficial neuroplasticity.
So we're not just passive passengers in this whole rewiring process. We can make choices and do things that actually support healthy changes in our brains. That's encouraging. But what about people who are already dealing with things like addiction or depression, where neuroplasticity might be working against them? Is there any hope for them?
Absolutely. There's this growing field of research that's all about developing therapies that use neuroplasticity to help people recover from these conditions. Like, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has actually been shown to help rewire the brain. It can help break those negative thought patterns and encourage healthier behaviors.
So it's not just about medication or willpower. We can actually work with the brain's natural ability to change and adapt, even when we're facing huge challenges.
Exactly. And it's not just talk therapy either. There are new technologies being developed, like brain stimulation techniques. They're showing a lot of promise for actually changing brain activity and boosting neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And that could help people with a whole bunch of different conditions.
Wow, this is so hopeful. It feels like we're right on the edge of a revolution in how we understand and treat brain-related conditions. But beyond those clinical applications, what about the implications for all of us, even those of us who aren't struggling with a specific condition? Does understanding neuroplasticity change how we should approach learning or personal growth, or even just living our everyday lives?
It definitely does. When you realize that your brain is constantly evolving and adapting, it opens up so many possibilities. It means that our limits aren't as fixed as we might think. We can challenge ourselves to learn new things, step outside of our comfort zones,
Right.
and really try to become the best versions of ourselves. Because we know that our brains can actually support us every step of the way.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on what's possible. If our brains are always changing, then maybe we're not stuck with all those personality quirks and bad habits and limiting beliefs that we've picked up along the way.
I think it's a really powerful insight. When we embrace this idea of neuroplasticity, we basically open ourselves up to a world of potential. We can break free from those self-limiting beliefs, push past the boundaries we think we have, and just keep striving for growth and transformation.
It's like we've been given the keys to our own brain's control panel, and now we have the chance to become the architects of our own destinies. But with all this incredible power
Comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah.
How do we make sure we're using this knowledge for good, and that we're not accidentally rewiring our brains in ways that could hurt us? It's true. It is a lot like we've been handed this superpower, but we need to learn how to use it responsibly. So I think a healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing. Just because, some product or some program claims to boost brain power doesn't necessarily mean it's actually backed by, solid scientific evidence. Look for approaches that are evidence-based, like programs and practices that have been rigorously studied and have been shown to actually have, real and lasting benefits. And be careful of anything that promises quick fixes or miraculous results. Real change in the brain, it takes time and effort.
Yeah, it's about being informed consumers, doing our research, and not falling for all the hype, right? But thinking about all this, are there bigger picture things we should be considering? Where's the line between enhancing our brains and actually changing what it means to be human?
That's a deep question. As we develop all these new technologies and techniques to influence how the brain works, it's really important to think about the ethical implications. For example, as we learn more about neuroplasticity, we're getting closer to being able to enhance our cognitive abilities, way beyond what's considered normal. And that raises all sorts of questions about, what it means to be human, what's considered a fair advantage, and how do we make sure these advancements actually benefit everyone?
It's almost like we're entering this whole new era of human potential, but we need to be really careful and have a lot of thoughtful discussions about what it all means. So, with all that in mind, what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away from today's deep dive?
Well, the most important message is that your brain is amazing. It's capable of incredible change and adaptation. And that's true throughout your entire life. So embrace that power, but use it wisely. Challenge yourself to learn new things, explore new things, and just take care of your brain by developing healthy habits. Never underestimate what it can do.
That's a great message. I feel like this deep dive has really opened my eyes to what's possible, and I have to say I'm walking away with a sense of awe and a renewed sense of responsibility for taking care of my own brain.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this whole neuroplasticity journey, it's ongoing. Every day brings new opportunities for growth, learning, and transformation. Stay curious, keep pushing those boundaries, and never stop exploring the incredible potential of your own amazing brain.
Well said. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of neuroplasticity. Remember, your brain is in your hands. Treat it with respect, nurture its growth, and never stop exploring its potential. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.